Okay, I'm on. All right, in Revelation chapter 16, we see the complete and final outpouring of God's wrath that's revealed in the outpouring of the 7 bowls of wrath. So Antichrist and his associates, they waged war against God through their organized and ferocious persecution of the church, but God punished them on earth, and as we'll see, cast them into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur in chapter 20, verse 20, which is the place of eternal torment. The great city, Babylon, which represents Antichrist's empire, the epitome of human pride and organized rebellion against God, is completely destroyed. His wrath on Babylon has been poured out. In chapter 16, verse 19, it says, Babylon was made to drain the cup of the wine of the fury of his wrath. And it's announced in chapter 16, verse 17, it says, it is done. You see, meaning his wrath has been poured out. But because Babylon epitomizes human defiance of and hostility toward God, its fate, the fate of Babylon, provides such an important lesson that fate is elaborated on in chapters 17 and 18. They present a different symbolic portrayal of the same reality that was shown in chapter 16. Babylon reaping what it had sowed. And so you kind of fall back and you get now a blow up and a closer look at that. Now, when we ended last week, we were looking at chapter 17, verses 1 to 6, where one of the 7 angels with the 7 bowls of God's wrath says he'll show John the judgment of the great whore or the great prostitute. And she's specifically identified as Babylon the Great in verse 5 and as the great city that rules over the kings of the earth in chapter 17, verse 18. And as I said, right when we ended, the image of a prostitute that was applied to pagan cities in the Old Testament. And you can see why that is. A prostitute is one who sells what should not be sold, who abandons what is right and noble in exchange for the false values of the world. Things like money and power and luxury. And that's where I want to pick back up. So the great whore, the great prostitute, is seated on many waters. And these waters, as we'll see in verse 15, represent peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. So her influence, you see, has flowed into all parts of the world. And I think about that. If you remember, in Eastern countries, for a long time have referred to the United States as the Great Satan. Now, whatever you think of that characterization, you see the notion of how things can flow out and have influence, and that's what's happened here. The kings of the earth committed fornication with her, in that they joined her in her idolatrous worship and in her other evils, and the inhabitants of the earth, the dwellers of the earth, those whose names are not written in the book of life, as we see in verse 8. They likewise became intoxicated by these practices, meaning they came under their influence. And John he's carried away in the Spirit, you see, reiterating his prophetic state. So this is a vision being given to him. He says he's carried away in the Spirit into a wilderness, and he sees a woman, the prostitute, described as the mother of prostitutes in verse 5, now seated on a scarlet beast. Now this beast seems to be the beast who was presented, we already met in chapter 13. the beast out of the sea. It has 7 heads and 10 horns, and it's covered in blasphemous names, which is how the beast of chapter 13 is described. And the color scarlet, here it probably points to the luxury in which the beast lived. The association of scarlet with luxury, it's seen in 17:4, in 18 verse 12 and 18 verse 16. But scarlet also could represent sin. As you recall in Isaiah chapter 1 verse 18, where it says, though your sins are like scarlet. Or it's a possible association, scarlet, with the red of the dragon. So any of those are possible. It seems here, though, more to be focusing on luxury. And you see that the woman she's clothed in luxurious garments. And she is adorned with gold and costly jewels, and she has a golden cup. Right? I mean, she is the image of luxury, splendor, and wealth, a symbol of the worldly or carnal attractions that lure people away from devotion to God. What she offers in the cup, however, is idolatrous worship, something abominable in the sight of God. So she is a gilded death trap. That's who she is. She has all of these trappings of luxury and wealth, these things that pull people, but abominations in her cup. So that's who she is. Now, written on her forehead was a name of mystery. See, meaning it's a name with a deeper meaning or significance than is apparent on the surface. And only those to whom the meaning is revealed, as we see in verse 7, only those to whom the meaning is revealed will grasp the full significance of the title. The name was Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. She is the ultimate manifestation of human pride in organized opposition to God, the center of the end-time anti-God political empire. And she was, we're told, she was drunk with the blood of the saints. Okay, this entity that we're talking about, she was drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs, the witnesses to Jesus. And this portrays the wanton slaughter of a significant number of believers, along with the intoxicating effect it produced on the murderous harlot. So she's drunk, slaughtering these Christians and intoxicated by it. It speaks of a lust for violence against the people of God. Right? It's not simply the thing, well, just try to protect them, leave them alone. No. There is this lust for killing them. There's an intoxication with it. And there are plenty of them dying because she's drunk from it. And John is greatly amazed by the sight of the woman. Perhaps he's amazed just because of how it's presented, just in the vision, the visuals of it. Or maybe he's amazed because her situation seemed in contrast to the judgment that the angel had promised to show. I'm going to show you the judgment, and he's looking, and there's no judgment there. I mean, she's living in luxury. So maybe that's what it was. Then we get the interpretation of the scene in chapter 17, verse 7 to 18. It says, "But the angel said to me, 'Why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was and is not, and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the dwellers on earth, the inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will marvel when they see the beast that was and is not and is to come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. They are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. 1 is, the other has not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. These are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. The angel said to me, the waters that you saw where the prostitute is seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by being of one mind and handing over their royal power to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. So the angel offers to explain the mystery of the woman and the beast. Now it's a single mystery. It's the mystery of the woman and the beast, but it's a single mystery involving both figures, the woman and the beast, but the explanation of the mystery centers on the beast. Now, I went through some of this when we were talking about looking at chapter 13. Now, as you know, the beast, in my view, and in the view of a fair number of commentators, is Antichrist. The end-time, Satan-inspired ruler of a powerful, worldwide, and violently anti-Christian empire. He was, is not, and is yet to come, in that Antichrist was not on the scene when John wrote. So he is not. And when he comes in the future, he's yet to come. He was, is not, yet to come. He's not there now. And when he comes in the future, he's yet to come. He will in some sense be a reappearance of the Christ-hating Nero, who killed himself with a sword in AD 68. Now that he will in some sense be a reappearance, it's also indicated in the statements that the beast had a mortal or a fatal sword wound, one that killed him, from which he was healed, that we see in chapter 13, verses 12 and 14. Now he's from the abyss or bottomless pit. That's also in 13:1. That same idea is referred to as the sea, because the bottomless depths of the sea, as I've mentioned before, that was the origin of the notion of the abyss or bottomless pit. But he's from the abyss or the bottomless pit in that he's closely associated with Satan and the demonic realm. This beast, Antichrist, is from there because of his close association with Satan and the demonic realm. And that association is indicated, right, by his similar appearance to the dragon, who's Satan. So this character looks 7 heads, right? He has the 7 heads, the 10 horns. He looks like him, and he's also in that similarity, that connection is indicated by the dragon giving him, Satan giving him his throne and authority, and it's indicated by the fact demonic miracles foster the worship of him. Okay, so he's from the bottomless pit in that he's associated with the dark side, with Satan, with demons. This figure, Antichrist. And verse 8, the first part, it can be translated, as it is here in the ESV, is about to come up from the abyss. Or it simply could be translated, he will come up, with an implication of certainty. And you see that, for example, in the King James, New King James, Revised Standard, New International Version. Now, if about to, when it says he's about to come up, if that's the correct sense, then it's another way of indicating that Christians are to live in the expectation that the end is always near. You remember right in the introduction, I talked about that, about since Christ's coming, we skate on the edge of the consummation. You see, so that he can arc over with it anytime he's come now. And with the inauguration of the kingdom, he can quickly come. So if that's the right reading, then that's what's being said there. And he goes to destruction. You see in verse 8 and 11, in that his fate is the lake of fire, into which he will be thrown at Christ's return. We see in chapter 19, verse 20, chapter 20, verse 10, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 8, he's on the scene when Jesus returns. Now, with the King James, the New American Standard, Holman Christian Standard, the Christian Standard Bible, I think the angel says that the unbelievers, the inhabitants of the earth whose names are not in the book of life, they will marvel when they see the beast that was and is not and will be present again, meaning they will marvel when they see Antichrist. In other words, I don't think he's saying that they will marvel because the beast was not, or was and is not and will be present again. I don't think he's saying that is the basis of their marveling, but rather that they will marvel when they see what the beast says and what he does, and they will flock to him like moths to a flame. That's what I think. So you have these unbelievers who he's going to attract them, and they're going to show themselves and be drawn to him that way. And the 7 heads are said first to represent 7 mountains on which the prostitute sits. Now, in the prophets in the Old Testament, mountains are sometimes used as a symbol for world powers or kingdoms. And you can see that, for example, in Jeremiah 51, verse 25, and Ezekiel 35, verse 3. And 7, as you know, it symbolizes perfection, the full number. You see? So, I think this symbolizes the worldwide scope and influence of Babylon the Great, the representation of Antichrist's defiant kingdom. In chapter 17, verse 18, the woman is described as the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. So that's what I think is being portrayed here when she sits on these 7 mountains as kingdoms or nations. She has all of them under her influence. Now, it is true that the city of Rome in the ancient world was known as the city on 7 hills. Rome was known that way. But I don't think this is a straightforward identification of the woman Babylon the Great with Rome. I don't think that's what's being said. As Leonard Thompson notes in his commentary, the more common phrase for referring to Rome was the adjectival form 7-hilled. That was more common of how Rome was referred to. And in addition, verse 9 says that wisdom is called for in grasping the meaning, which suggests, at least to me, that something deeper than a well-known geographical identification is being talked about. Right? I mean, if it's just a straightforward, that's the set of 7-hilled city, 7, that's obviously Rome. Well, then why is wisdom needed? Something deeper is going on here, and that's what I think. I think it's representative of all of the nations that give their allegiance and loyalty to Antichrist. So in my view, all right, Babylon the Great sits on 7 mountains. In that, Antichrist empire encompasses all the kingdoms of the earth. And that symbolism, it also serves a secondary purpose, portraying Antichrist's empire, you see, as a kind of Rome. Right? So it's Antichrist empire, mysteries involved here, but there's a secondary saying, so Antichrist empire will encompass all of the kingdoms. The 7 mountains will be giving their allegiance to Antichrist. But this secondary purpose, it shows or portrays that kingdom as a kind of Rome, as a city that shares but surpasses the power, the godlessness, and the anti-Christian hostility of Rome of John's day. Okay, so I get that added. So I'm showing it's going to be encompass all of the nations, and by having that Rome flavor in there, I am portraying the end time empire as I say, as Rome on steroids. You see, they were very familiar with the anti-Christian attitude of Rome and its power and its hatred of God and these things. Okay, so I throw that in as part of the imagery. Now, the 7 heads of the beast, they're also said, so they represent the 7 mountains, but they're also said to represent 7 kings, 5 of which have fallen, 1 is, and the other, who must remain a short time, is yet to come. Now, as I explained when we're in chapter 13, I think the 7 kings, I think this is probably that number, they are symbolic of the full number, 7, the full number of blasphemous earthly rulers, which set that full number of blasphemous earthly rulers, those rulers who are hostile to God and claim divine status. That set culminates in Antichrist. That set of blasphemous earthly rulers is finished, culminates in Antichrist. Now, if that's correct, then this is another apocalyptic way of indicating that Christ is at the door. Right? Though the time of his coming is uncertain, of Jesus' return, Christians are to live in the expectation that the end is always near. We always are to live with that mindset. And so being the 6th king, we're into the 6th king. The complete set of blasphemous earthly rulers means that the 7th and final one, Antichrist, who will stay only a short time before being taken out by Christ, well, we're on the verge of his coming. And his coming is the verge of Christ's coming. So I look at it as saying, look, 7 is the full number of these blasphemous earthly rulers. We're deep into that. And so we have 7 yet just to come who will be Antichrist, the final and culminating member of that group, and he will last only a short time. So you're here, Christ. Right, so that's what I think. So in other words, I don't think it is we go and count specific kings. Now, there are people that think that. Okay, I'm just not one of them. I think there's more that is going on there. Now, the beast here, he belongs to the 7. He belongs to the 7 in that this Antichrist figure, he shares their blasphemous claims of divinity. Just like you have Domitian who's on the throne, then you have emperor worship. You've had other blasphemous earthly rulers after the institution or the inauguration of the kingdom. So he shares their blasphemous claims of divinity, their opposition to God, and their persecution of God's people. He is the completion of that set of rulers. But he is an eighth king. So he's of the seven, right? In that he shares their nature and he culminates that set and completes that set. But he's an eighth king in the sense he's distinct from the others of that set, presumably by virtue of his greater embodiment of satanic power. Okay, none of that's spelled out, none of that's told. I'm just telling you how I see it. When it says he's an eighth king, he is of the seven, but there is some sense in which he is distinct from the seven. Okay, and I think it's probably his greater embodiment of satanic power. Like, you've seen these people before. You've seen how hostile they can be and what they can do and how they can abuse the power of the state to kill Christians. Well, you've not seen anything yet till you see this person to whom Satan gives his power and his authority. And miracles are performed on his behalf. Now, it's also possible that he's an eighth king. That's what that's getting at, in that he is a reappearance, a resurrection, so to speak, of an earlier blasphemous king. Right? You say, well, how would eighth get you to that? Well, the number 8, it could symbolize a new beginning. You see, based on Sunday, known as the 8th day, being the start of a new series of days. And in fact, Jesus was resurrected on the 8th day. So maybe that's involved in it. Now, the horns of the beast, they're said to symbolize 10 future kings. Okay, 10 future kings. They have not yet received authority, but 10 future kings who, with the beast, will receive authority for a short time. They represent the kings of the whole world, as said in chapter 16, verse 14, who cast their lot with the beast, as you see in chapter 17, verse 13, and make war on the Lamb in the great persecution of his church. Isman Beckwith says in his commentary, he says, 10, which among all the peoples using the decimal system is found frequently as a round number for fullness, completeness, occurs often in this sense in the Bible and apocalyptic writers. So this is what I'm seeing here. You see, so you have 7 and 10, both indicating completeness, 7 perfection, 10 fullness, perhaps from 10 fingers, all the fingers we've got. But you see this, so here we have these 10 horns, which are these kings of the world. So the 7 mountains, and as I see it, the 7 mountains on which this person sits, this prostitute sits, represent the kingdoms of the world, and the 10 kings represent the kings of the world in solidarity with the beast. So this is why I see it's a worldwide empire. Everybody's getting, not, every individual, but all of the world is getting on board with this. And I have to tell you that as I look at the world today, there are times when you'd say, how would that even be possible? How would all of the world get pulled in the same direction and gather in one perspective and view? Oh, I can see it happening. You see, I can definitely see it happening. Now, the second part of verse 14 says, and the Lamb will conquer them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And those with him are called the chosen and faithful. They are called and chosen and faithful. So in one sense, of course, Christ has already conquered all enemies through his atoning death and resurrection, right? I mean, the victory's been won. D-Day has already happened. It's a fait accompli. All right, the rest is just running downhill. It's just waiting it out. So there's a sense, right, in which the victory's already won, but there's another sense in which he will conquer those who make war against him. When he returns to consummate the kingdom that he inaugurated. Christ is returning in judgment with his holy angels when the number of martyrs is complete, as it said in chapter 6, verses 9 to 11. And he will mete out punishment and vengeance on his enemies. Those who are with the Lord are called, right, chosen and faithful. Those who stand steadfast with him, they will hear, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." Not easy, but he's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Now you got a guy here who's got plenty of bluster. He's got plenty of power. He's offering all kinds of things. If you cast your lot with me, there will be value and benefit. If you don't, there's going to be suffering and persecution and hardship. So he has a lot of juice. But God says, Jesus is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And you cast your lot with him, and you stay with him. And see, and you will be called chosen, faithful. That's who you are, and you will be blessed accordingly. Now, the many waters on which the whore or the prostitute was seated in 17:1 are called here in verse 15, said to represent peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. As I said, her influence has flowed into all parts of the world, not only to rulers and their kingdoms, but to people from all groups of the earth. You have people from all over who are part of this end-time imperial cult. You see, who are down with that and see Christians as the enemies, Christians who need to be attacked. And you think, how would you ever get to a war where people thought it just and right to slaughter Christians? Well, you can see that we have the ability to be persuaded to do anything. As John looking at me, abortion is one situation. I think of the Nazis. You think of this very developed German nation that produced all this great literature and everything, and then turned around, all the people are convinced that Jews are subhuman and it's okay to kill them. Don't think this can't happen. Okay? It can happen. And this is what I look at seeing here. Now, virtually all commentators, okay, they see verses 16 and 17 as an indication that the beast and his allies will turn on Babylon and destroy it in some kind of civil strife. Okay? But I'm not convinced that's correct. Okay, so now I'm swimming against virtually all commentators. And when I tell you that, that's a warning to you to be particularly careful with what I'm telling you. Okay? But I'm just not convinced that just doesn't do it for me. As I said, I think the 10 kings in 1712, they represent the kings of the whole world. As you see in 1614, who cast their lot with the beast in chapter 17:13 and make war on the Lamb in the great persecution of the church. Now, if I'm right in that, and that seems pretty straightforward to me, if I'm right in that, they can't, it seems to me, have turned against Babylon and actively destroyed her, as indicated in the second part of verse 16, because the kings of the earth, as we will see in chapter 18, verses 9 and 10, they mourn the destruction of Babylon. You know, so when Babylon's destroyed, they mourn it. Now, I guess you could say, yeah, well, they killed it, you know. It just doesn't seem to me that we're on the right track here. Now, also, since the whore represents Babylon the Great, we see in 17:5, the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth in 17:18, it is a symbol of Antichrist's empire, the center of prideful humanity in organized opposition to God. Now, certainly God could cause Antichrist to commit suicide. He could cause him to self-destruct, to actively and directly attack his own empire. But given how unusual that would be, I need less ambiguous indications that that's what's being said. The fact Babylon's destruction is elsewhere, it is portrayed as coming through God's direct action with no hint of Antichrist serving as God's agent in his destruction of Babylon. Well, that reinforces my uneasiness with that interpretation. Okay, I just think that there's something amiss there. Now, I think, you take this for what it's worth with my due warning, I think that verses 16 and 17, the point is that the beast and the kings of the earth who unite with him, they, quote, hate the beast's empire represented by Babylon the Great. They hate that empire in the objective sense that their uniting against God in persecution of God's people is what precipitated God's destruction of Babylon. In other words, I think their hatred is viewed objectively rather than subjectively. In bringing about that destruction through their rebellion and their assault on God's people, they expressed hatred for that empire. As we might say that a child who drove his mother to an early grave by continually breaking her heart, we might say that that child hated his mother. However the child may have felt subjectively, whatever the child may have said when you said, "Do you hate your mother?" "No, I love my mother," right? One could say he hated her in the objective sense that he would not cease from the conduct that killed her. Okay? I think that's how it is that the hatred is viewed objectively rather than subjectively. Now, God led them. He orchestrated this and worked the situation. He led them to unify in their hostility. So they hate, they are after him, but he had this, he orchestrated their unifying against him. They're cooperating together in their evil because it was his purpose to bring the final judgment in their day, to bring history to a close at that time. In doing so, in organizing in that way, in this rebellion that God then ends with the second coming of Christ, they were fulfilling the words of God. They were fulfilling his revelation that the final judgment would be preceded by the rise of an anti-God, anti-Christian empire. You see, so I think that he has them cooperate. It is time to bring history to a close. He's going to do that with this great hatred and rebellion. He orchestrates their cooperating so they fulfill the prophecies that you see like in Daniel 7 and Daniel 11 and Daniel 12 and 2 Thessalonians. That you're going to have this kind of scene when Jesus returns. It is going to be that kind of great persecution. So they are in that fulfilling the Word of God. So that's what I think is being said there. Then we go to 18, 1-3. After this I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was made bright with his glory. And he called out with a mighty voice, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling place for demons, a haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and detestable beast. For all nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality. And the kings of the earth have committed immorality with her. And the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxurious living." So John sees an angel coming down from heaven who has great authority. He is an agent of God Almighty. And the earth is made bright from the angel's glory, which suggests that he has come directly from the divine presence. And the angel announces with a mighty voice Babylon's inescapable destruction. As Leon Morris points out, and others, says the city's doom is still future in these chapters, right? We saw it finalized in 16. Now we're going back and we're getting an elaboration on that. But in this elaboration, Babylon's doom is still future. He says, but it is so certain that it can be spoken of as already accomplished. It's a done deal. Fallen is Babylon the Great. There's no avoiding it. You can see, for example, there's future tenses in verses 8 and 9, verse 15 and verse 21. Now, in words reminiscent of God's condemnation of ancient Babylon, words that you see in Isaiah 13, 19 to 22, and Jeremiah 50, verse 39, Jeremiah 51, 37, the angel portrays Babylon the Great as a city that is left desolate. A city that is left desolate. This thriving center of a world empire is depicted as a wilderness void of human inhabitants. Just gone, just a wilderness. It is left, this great thriving center of this empire is left with only the non-human symbols of its hostility and alienation from God. Unclean spirits and various unclean animals. That's all it's left with. It has been devastated. And the reason for her judgment is her role in leading the world in rebellion against God. It drew the nations and the rulers into its idolatry, into its rejection of the worship of the one true God. It drew it into its worship of Antichrist, the beast, this lying thing, where everybody's giving it devotion, allegiance, worship. That way it drew them into that. So it brings them into the worship of the beast, which is, of course, that's unfaithfulness to the Creator. And from that idolatry flowed all kinds of literal sexual misconduct. And part of its lure, right? Part of that lure was its wealth, right? It was its wealth, the opportunity it offered those willing to sell their souls to share in its luxury, right? I mean, so here it is. This is the way for you to have the good life. If you want to join the world community, and you want to be here and you want to benefit from all the material blessings that can be yours if you will come and join us, well, then you just have to renounce Christ and come and cast your lot in devotion to the beast. And then you too can experience. If you don't, it's going to be hard for you. You see, and I see this as so relevant, right? Always these pulls and appeals to say, compromise your commitment to Jesus, compromise your faith, and you will benefit. So it's just basically being paid to sell your soul instead, I heard that bell, instead of standing up and saying, look, I don't care. If I have to live on the street, I'm not going to sell my allegiance to the one true God simply because you're paying me and you want me to be a certain way that He tells me not to be. I'm not going to do it. Amen. Let the chips fall where they may, but I cast my lot with Him. Okay? That's important. Thanks.